Declassified.
Figure out yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified
Yeah.
it. Now I can't, but this is
Yeah,
classified.
yeah.
Tapes obtained by CNN capture former President Trump discussing classified military plans. Prosecutors argued the recording, taken 2 years ago at his golf club in New Jersey, revealed that Trump may have shared documents with people who didn't have clearance. The former president defended his actions, insisting he was not holding on to classified materials when this conversation was recorded. He's already pleaded not guilty to federal charges. This week, Senator Todd Young was asked about the former president's legal troubles in the midst of his latest campaign for president.
Listen, all this constellation of issues raises my blood pressure on a regular basis. I'm hearing increasingly from my neighbors who are conservative people, but they've had enough. It is time to turn the page on President Trump. It's time to move on to an authentic conservative who can win a general election, and that's where my head is right now.
Anybody you're endorsing?
No, not at this time. I'm just assessing the field and trying to learn more about each of the candidates, as are most Hoosiers.
Some interesting comments there from Senator Todd Young. Let's bring in our panel right now. With us today, former state party chair for the Indiana Democrats, Robin Winston, 2016 vice chair for the Indiana Trump campaign, Tony Samuel, along with former state representative Mike Murphy and UIndy political science professor Dr. Laura Wilson. Lots to talk about, including the Supreme Court rulings. But first, Laura, Senator Young's comments there really more firmly against Trump's bid for re-election than he's been. He's not gone as far as he did in those comments there, though the former president continues to hold big leads among Republican primary voters.
Oh, he absolutely does. And you see Trump well in the lead, with DeSantis slightly behind, and then Pence even further. I think that that's really one of the challenges Republicans have to grapple with this election cycle. It's, where do you stand on Trump? Are you going to support him? Or there's several other candidates in the field. Who's going to be the person that will truly challenge him? It just feels incredibly divisive, and I think Senator Young's comments kind of highlight that kind of antagonism.
Mike, what did you make of those comments? You're among those Republicans who, like Senator Young, thinks the party should move on from Trump, but it doesn't seem as if most GOP voters share that sentiment right now.
Well, I think they'll get there. First of all, Todd Young should be the North Star for any Indiana Republican. He's sensible, he's smart, he's cautious, and he's very analytical. And I agree with him. I think most Americans will agree with him when the time comes. There's absolutely no way you can defend having Donald Trump as the nominee for the Republican Party next year. If that's the case, Republicans might as well save their money and give the presidency to the Democrats.
Tony, I know you've got a different view. Meantime, a lot of questions about that tape we just heard, including who leaked it. Some Trump supporters blame the DOJ, while others have wondered if Trump's team himself would leak it to get ahead of this, or to delay the court proceedings altogether somehow.
Not sure who leaked it, but this will probably continue. It did during, his administration with when there was the Russia hoax and the phony impeachments and those kinds of things. There are, several folks in the media and on the left and in the Republican establishment that don't want Donald Trump. But the
Todd
voters,
Young among them now.
Todd Young among them, and I like Todd Young. He's a friend, but I would take issue at him saying that that Donald Trump's not an authentic conservative. We're talking a lot about the court rulings, the U.S. Supreme Court rulings, and it was Donald Trump that put 3 conservative justices on that court, and those things are paying off. And those are the kinds of reasons that voters, Republican voters, are supporting him well ahead of DeSantis and well ahead of Pence in the 50s. Remember, in 2016, folks said, oh, he won't get over 25, he won't get over 30. He's in the 50s with support from Republican primary voters.
Those court rulings, we'll talk about them more soon, no doubt will play a big role in the 2024 election. Robin, meantime, the president focusing this week on what he calls Bidenomics. While only 1 in 3 U.S. adults right now approve of his economic leadership, according to a recent AP poll. Overall, the president right now with an approval rating of 41%. That's a figure that hasn't moved a whole lot for the last year and a half, though he still does lead Trump in most hypothetical head-to-head matchups. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, first off, he's taken his message out. He was in Chicago. I mean, you've got cabinet heads going all over the country to talk about his plans. Here in Indiana, you look at the investments going to be made in broadband, $868 million. That's going to make a difference for hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers. We're talking about the state's budget surplus. That comes from the investment in our states. And then lastly, the president is just making the office people proud to be in the office again. We're not talking about classified documents being leaked to people.
We're going to talk more about that broadband investment coming up. We're also talking about another candidate for president, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's coming here to Indiana later this month at a fundraiser being hosted by GOP power broker Bob Grand, who's been a close ally of Mike Pence's through the years. The July 12th event also being promoted by the Republican Party in Hamilton County, which is also where Pence makes his home. Pence, meantime, making that trip to Ukraine this week, meeting with President Zelensky. And Laura, Pence has been critical of Governor DeSantis and the governor's views on Ukraine here in recent months.
This feels like a risky move, but I think it's a smart strategy because this is a way he differentiates himself. As Tony mentioned, Trump is leading handedly in the polls with DeSantis behind and then Pence in third from that. But where DeSantis and Trump have been critical of the aid to Ukraine, having Pence there, being able to say, look, we support you, right? And having that face coming back to voters, people making their decisions in terms of for the Republican primary, who they support. I think it's a risky but smart strategy decision for him.
Mike, what do you make of this, especially after everything that we saw in Russia last weekend?
Brilliant move on Mike Pence's part. You know, if Ronald Reagan were still alive, he would be laughing at Donald Trump and DeSantis, who are backing way away from any American principles of defending freedom around the world. Mike Pence believes in freedom here in the United States. He believes in it in the Ukraine, and he's going to show that with his visit.
Meantime, Tony, the Pence and DeSantis campaigns have kind of been going at each other here in recent days from this position of second and third place, as you mentioned. Does that matter much in your view with the former president holding the leads he does now?
Not a lot right now, but it could. I mean, you never know. It's still quite a while until those primaries really get going. I think Trump will hold his lead, but you never know, and you've got to do what you can, and Pence is doing the right thing to differentiate himself from the others. But let me just make a comment on the whole Ukraine war. Folks aren't critical of freedom or defending freedom. Folks that are questioning the unending amount of dollars, billions and billions of dollars that we're giving with no end game in sight. This war is escalating. That's what Trump, DeSantis, and most Republican voters are concerned about.
Right.
Well, there's still a bear in the woods, as Ronald Reagan would use in one of his ads. Tony, the bottom line is that Joe Biden has made investments to protect democracy. He's made investments to protect the Ukrainians. That's why Mike Pence is able to go there today. I don't think it's a bad investment to protect freedom at all.
Robin, we've also got to talk about the Supreme Court rulings this past week, including the court's historic and controversial decision on affirmative action. What are the practical and political implications of this, do you think, heading into an election year?
Well, first off, Tony said that Trump appointed 3 justices. Look what they've done, gotten rid of Roe versus Wade, ruled against affirmative action. I hope the voters will remember that in November of 24. I sure hope they will. As far as it relates to affirmative action, we'll get a real test of these colleges and universities' commitment to diversity without a mandate.
Some of them issuing statements already.
So let's see if
Thursday.
they live up to that goal.
Finally, Laura, we spoke about it earlier, the Supreme Court ruling rejecting the independent legislature theory. What does that mean here in Indiana and really more broadly for our democracy?
Well, this is huge, that rejection. Proponents of the independent state legislative theory thought that with Article 1, Section 4 and Article 2, Section 1 in the U.S. Constitution, that state legislatures could overrule the judicial branch on things like gerrymandering. And in a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court said, no, we still have checks and balances. It's really important because it would have upended the election system as we know it, and it's already complicated in terms of federalism and state powers and federal powers. But I think this was certainly the right decision, and this was a fringe theory that started to gain a lot more momentum. It's interesting the Supreme Court took it up. I don't think the decision, though, was surprising.
A lot happening in the court this week. There'll be a lot of reaction to the student loan ruling as well. Coming up next, the Indiana impact of the infrastructure bill, with money coming to the Hoosier State for public transit and internet service. So how much money? We'll hear from the U.S. Commerce Secretary up next.